Zaun is a large, undercity district, lying in the deep canyons and valleys threading Piltover. What light reaches below is filtered through fumes leaking from the tangles of corroded pipework and reflected from the stained glass of its industrial architecture. Zaun and Piltover were once united, but are now separate, yet symbiotic societies. Though it exists in perpetual smog twilight, Zaun thrives, its people vibrant and its culture rich. Piltover's wealth has allowed Zaun to develop in tandem, a dark mirror of the city above. Many of the goods coming to Piltover find their way into Zaun's black markets, and Hextech inventors who find the restrictions placed upon them in the city above too restrictive often find their dangerous researches welcomed in Zaun. Unfettered development of volatile technologies and reckless industry has rendered whole swathes of Zaun polluted and dangerous. Streams of toxic runoff stagnate in the sea's lower reaches, but even here, people find a way to exist and prosper. Blitzcrank, the great steam golem. Zaun is a place of wondrous experimentation and vibrant, colorful life where anything can be achieved, but not without a cost. For all its boundless creativity, there is also waste, destruction, and suffering in the Undercity, so pervasive that even the tools created to alleviate it cannot escape its corrosive grasp. Designed to remove the toxic waste claiming whole neighborhoods of Zaun, lumbering mechanical golems toiled in violently hazardous locations. One such golem worked alongside its fellows, fulfilling its programming to reclaim Zaun for the people. But the caustic reality of their mission soon wore away at its robust form, and before long it was rendered inoperative and discarded as useless. Useless to all but one person. The inventor, Viktor, discovered the abandoned golem and, seeing the potential still within the inert chassis, inspiration struck. Viktor began a series of experiments, seeking to improve the automaton by introducing a new element that would elevate it far beyond the original scope of its creation: Hextech. Implanting a priceless Hextech crystal, sourced from the deserts of Shurima, into the chassis of the Forsaken Golem, Viktor waited with bated breath as the machine rumbled to life. Viktor named the golem Blitzcrank after the fizzing arcs of lightning that danced around their frame, an unexpected side effect of the Hextech crystal, and sent them down into the most toxic regions of Zaun. Not only did Blitzcrank prove as capable as any of their steam-powered brethren, but they accomplished their tasks with vastly improved speed and efficiency. And as the days turned into weeks, Viktor began to watch something miraculous unfold. His creation was learning. The Blitzcrank innovated, interpreting, and extrapolating on their daily directives. As a result, they did far more to serve the people of Zaun, and even began to interact with them on a regular basis. Seeing his golem progress to the cusp of self-awareness, Viktor sought to replicate his achievement, but found only frustration and failure, as the key to Blitzcrank's blossoming consciousness eluded him. Not all of Blitzcrank's growth was cause for celebration. Concepts like moderation and nuance escaped them, and Blitzcrank would pursue any effort with the entirety of their being, or none at all. They would occasionally overdo or misinterpret the requests of Zaunites, such as smashing down the front of a tenement to admit a single resident who had lost their key, or even tearing an entire factory apart. Dispatched by Viktor to clear a neighborhood of toxic chemicals, Blitzcrank traced the caustic runoff to its source. Reasoning that the most efficient means to prevent further pollution was to eliminate the source of said pollution, Blitzcrank proceeded to destroy the factory, their lightning-wreathed fists not stopping until it was reduced to a mound of rubble and twisted iron. Enraged, the Chem Baron who owned the ruined factory descended upon Viktor, demanding that he destroy the golem or pay a steeper price in blood. Viktor was devastated, having come to view Blitzcrank as a living being rather than simply a tool to do his bidding. He concocted a scheme to smuggle his creation to safety, ready to accept the dangers and consequences of doing so. But as he returned to his laboratory to set his plan in motion, he discovered that Blitzcrank was already gone. Blitzcrank's evolution beyond the constraints of their original programming had yet to cease. Having grown into full self-sufficiency, they resolved to take up their mission independent from their creator. Rumors abound that the golem has even begun to upgrade their own form, as they labor tirelessly to assist and protect Zaunites without pausing for instruction. They now patrol the Undercity, deciding for themselves how best to shepherd Zaun down the path to becoming the greatest city Valoran has ever seen. Dr. Mundo, the madman of Zaun. In the wards of Zaun's infamous asylum, a single monstrous figure roams the halls. His methods are bold, his bone saw is sharp, and his patients are terrified. For this man is no doctor at all, except in the fancy of his own mind. Though his true name has been lost to both time and memory, Dr. Mundo was once an enforcer for one of Zaun's most powerful chembarons. Known for his boisterous affability, he was remarkably good-natured for a man who made his living off physical intimidation. He was always quick with a familiar nickname and a friendly clap on the back, and often blissfully unaware of the toes he was stepping on. It wasn't long before he had stepped firmly on the toes of his boss. Determined to make an example of his underling, the Chembaron had him committed to Oswald Asylum, a place well known for its inhumane treatment and questionable cures. The Baron watched with satisfaction as his enforcer was placed in restraints and dragged away to the padded confines of the asylum's most secure cell. As months went by, the enforcer suffered unspeakable horrors at the hands of his supposed caregivers. Experimental treatments were rendered without concern for the patient's well-being. Nerves were prodded, lobes were severed, and unproved medicines were administered in large quantities. The enforcer began to change, his large frame gaining more muscle by the day. His brain, however, suffered a far worse fate. As he lost all memory of his past life, the enforcer struggled to make sense of the cruel world around him. He looked down at his old restraining jacket. It almost resembled the white coats of the medical professionals that surrounded him. Misreading the words on his own uniform, he began to assume a new name and new profession for himself. I must be a doctor too. Why else would I be in this wretched asylum, he reasoned. And all these other people must be my patients. At last, the day came when the Chembaron arrived to discharge his enforcer from the asylum. To his surprise, there was no one to greet him in the lobby. The halls were empty and dead silent, save for the faint, incoherent babbling of a deranged patient in a room at the end of the hallway. The Baron entered the room to a horrifying sight. Scattered across the floor were countless bodies, staff and patients alike, dismembered beyond recognition. Standing above them, a hulking purple monstrosity blathered unintelligibly as a large blue tongue lolled out the side of its gaping mouth. Muscles bulged grotesquely beneath its undersized garments, and its fist tightened around the handle of a surgical saw. The Baron turned pale as his gaze found the face of the monster, and recognized it as his old enforcer. The enforcer, who recalled nothing of his old boss, saw only another patient in desperate need of treatment. The purple thing lumbered toward the Chembaron, wagging his bone saw in anticipation. The Baron drew his Cumtech pistol and fired. The shot tore through the looming mass in front of him, staggering the monster, but only for a brief moment. The hole in the creature's flesh quickly closed as new slabs of muscle rapidly regrew over the wound. The monster paused, eyed the Baron quizzically, and uttered, "You, sick, need help," mimicking what he had seen performed countless times by the asylum's former practitioners. The enforcer threw the man on a nearby gurney, strapped his arms into the restraints, and prepared his instruments for surgery. The Chembaron turned pale as he realized the grim fate that awaited him. The ensuing surgery, like so many before and after it, was not successful. The burgeoning doctor added the remains of his latest patient to the pile on the floor. Though he was saddened he could not save them, he knew he had done all he could. Besides, he would have other chances. Zaun was full of sick people just waiting to be cured. With a smile returning to his face, he left the hospital and set out into the streets to find more patients. Ekko, the boy who shattered time. Born with genius-level intellect, Ekko constructed simple machines before he could crawl. His parents, Inna and Wyeth, vowed to provide a good future for their son. Zaun, with all its pollution and crime, would only stifle Ekko, whom they felt deserved the wealth and opportunities of Piltover. Throughout his youth, he watched his parents age beyond their years, toiling for too many hours under dangerous conditions in suffocating factories. They earned meager wages, while greedy factory owners and sneering Piltovan buyers profited immensely from their labor. It would all be worth it, they reasoned, if it meant their son could one day rise to the city above. Ekko saw things differently. Beyond Zaun's flaws, he saw a dynamic place, overflowing with energy and potential. Zaun Unite's industry, resourcefulness, and resilience stirred a hotbed of pure innovation. They had built a thriving culture from catastrophe and flourished where others would have perished. That spirit captivated Ekko and spurred him to a youth of wild invention and innovation. He wasn't alone. He befriended scrappy orphans, inquisitive runaways, and eager upstarts. Zaunitis tended to eschew formal education in favor of apprenticeships, but these lost children of Zaun looked to the labyrinthine streets to be their mentor. They wasted time in glorious youthful fashion, foot races through the border markets, or daring climbs from the sump to the promenade. They ran wild and free, answering to no one. One night, on a solo trek into the rubble of a recently demolished laboratory, Ekko made an astonishing find, a shard of blue-green crystal that glittered with magical energy. Every child of Zaun heard tales of Hextech said to power weapons and heroes alike. Such a thing had the potential to change the world, and now he held a broken one. He scrambled to find more pieces, but the crunching footfalls of teched-up enforcers told him he wasn't the only one looking. Ekko barely escaped and returned to his home. He experimented madly with the crystal. During one less-than-scientific attempt, the gem exploded into a vortex of shimmering dust, triggering eddies of temporal distortion. Ekko opened his eyes to see several splintered realities and several Ekko versions of himself, staring back in sheer panic. Amid the fractured continuum, he'd really done it this time. After some tense coordination between Ekko and his paradoxes, they managed to contain and repair the hole he had torn in the fabric of reality. Eventually, he harnessed the shattered crystal's temporal powers into a device that would allow him to manipulate small increments of time, at least in theory. On his name day, his friends badgered him into climbing the ancient clock tower known as Old Hungary, so Ekko brought the untested device along with him. The lost children climbed, stopping occasionally to paint an obscene caricature or two of prominent Pilties. They were near the top when a handhold gave way, sending one of Ekko's friends tumbling to certain doom. Instinctively, as if he'd done it 1,000 times before, Ekko activated his device. The world shattered around him, and he was wrenched backward through swirling particles of time. Then Ekko was back, watching his friend reach again for the same rotting plank. The plank broke, the boy fell, but Ekko was ready this time, diving to the edge and grabbing him by the shirt. Ekko tried to swing him to safety, but his friend became caught in the tower's clockwork gears and... Stop. Rewind. Several attempts later, Ekko finally saved his friend's life. But to his crew, Ekko's supernatural reflexes had saved their friend before anyone even realized the danger. He told them about the crystal and made them swear to secrecy. Instead, they dared each other to new heights of foolishness, knowing Ekko had the means to pluck them out of danger. With each trial and so much error, the time-warping device, which Ekko dubbed the Zero Drive, grew more and more stable. The only limit was how many do-overs his body could take before exhaustion set in. Ekko's time-bending antics have made him a person of interest to some of Zaun and Piltover's most inventive, most powerful, and most dangerous individuals. But his only interest is in his friends, his family, and his city. He dreams of the day when his hometown rises up to dwarf the so-called City of Progress, when Piltover's golden veneer will be overshadowed by the towering ingenuity and relentless spunk of a Zaun born not from generations of privilege, but from sheer daring. He may not have a plan yet, but he's got all the time in the world. After all, if Ekko's Z-Drive can change the past, how hard can it be to change the future? Janna, the storm's fury. Since ancient times, there have been those who prayed to the winds. From sailors seeking good weather to the downtrodden calling on winds of change, mortals have placed their hope in the tempests and gales that sweep across Runeterra. Surprisingly, the wind sometimes would seem to answer. Seafarers might spot a bright blue bird just before a healthy tailwind billowed their sails. Others could swear they'd heard a whistling in the air right before a storm, as if to warn them of its approach. As word of these omens spread, sightings of the bird grew more common. Some even swore they had seen the bird transform into a woman. With tapered ears and flowing hair, this mysterious maiden was said to float above the water and direct the wind with a flick of her staff. The faithful called this wind spirit Yanarum, an ancient Shuraman word meaning guardian, for she always seemed to appear in moments of great need. As time went on, she came to be known more simply as Janna. Her name spread across the Shuraman continent's coasts, and the seafaring people of Zaun were her most fervent believers. They depended on calm seas for the trade ships that traveled through their city's port. Statues and shrines were raised in gratitude for Janna's benevolence. After the Shuraman Empire enveloped the city, these displays of devotion continued for time. When the emperor issued decrees suppressing false idols, Janna's statues were torn down. Yet despite the growing worship of the ascended god warriors, many still offered quiet prayers to Janna. For what could god warriors do to protect ships from storms? These mortals often wore amulets with the image of a bluebird, smaller, more personal tokens in Janna's honor. Through all of this, Janna continued to aid the vulnerable who called upon her. In a region rife with upheaval, she remained constant. Those with an eye toward history might appreciate the irony of winds of change being the only thing that did not. After the great empire fell, once verdant lands became a desert as the remaining ascended brought war and chaos. Yet Janna shielded the city, now known as Zaun, from the turmoil. Over the centuries, Janna watched as Zaun's ambitions grew. While the city was still a robust trade port, its denizens aspired for more. They dreamed of cutting a canal through the isthmus on which they lived, opening a path that would unite the seas surrounding Valoran and Shurima. The city poured great effort, wealth, and time into the construction. Prayers to Janna waned as mortal dreams focused on mortal machinations. However, the canal's excavation made great portions of Zaun unstable. On one cataclysmic day, entire districts on the River Pilt collapsed below the western sea level, and thousands suddenly found themselves fighting for their lives against the clashing currents. As these unfortunate souls faced their doom, they prayed for salvation. They called out the name of their ancient protector, Janna. Though these mortals had seemingly forgotten her until now, Janna did not hesitate to help them. An immense gale swept over the city as she took corporeal form. Impossible walls of air held flooding waters at bay as people fled the drowned ruins of their homes. Ferocious gusts of wind cut through the suffocating smoke from fires caused by the destruction. Yet, while she saved many, thousands still perished that day. But all who survived witnessed Janna's benevolence. Never again would the city's people forget their savior. To this day, through the rise of Piltover and the ongoing struggles of modern Zaun, Janna's faithful wear bluebird medallions and show reverence to the winds. And through it all, Janna stands steadfast by the humble and the meek. Zaunites all know that whether they fight for breath amid the toxic clouds of the Zaun Grey, stand against the brutality of violent Chembarons, or fend off other threats, Janna will not abandon them. Jinx, the least canon. While most look at Jinx and see only a mad woman wielding an array of dangerous weapons, a few remember her as a relatively innocent girl from Zaun, a tinkerer with big ideas who never quite fit in. No one knows for certain what happened to turn that sweet young child into a wild card, infamous for her wanton acts of destruction. But once Jinx exploded onto the scene in Piltover, her unique talent for sowing anarchy instantly became the stuff of legend. Jinx first gained notoriety through her anonymous pranks on the citizens of Piltover, particularly those with connections to the wealthy merchant clans. These pranks ranged from the moderately annoying to the criminally dangerous. She blocked streets on Progress Day, with a stampede of exotic animals freed from Count May's menagerie. She disrupted trade for weeks when she lined the city's iconic bridges with adorably destructive flame choppers. Once, she even managed to move every street sign in town to new and utterly confusing locations. Though this unknown troublemaker's target seemed random, and her motivation nothing more than pure chaos, her actions always served to bring the city's orderly bustle to a screeching halt. Naturally, the wardens attributed some of her crimes to chempunk gangs from the Undercity. Having others get credit for her manic schemes didn't sit well with Jinx, and so she made sure to make her presence known at every future crime scene. Rumors soon circulated of the mysterious, blue-haired Zaunite girl carrying chemtech explosives, a shark-mouth rocket launcher, and a rapier gun. Still, the authorities dismissed these reports as preposterous. After all, how could a lowly street punk possibly obtain such lethal ordnance? Jinx's bombastic spree seemed endless, with the warden's attempts to catch the culprit thwarted at every turn. She began tagging her works of destruction with vivid graffiti and other taunting messages directed at the city sheriff's newest ally in the fight against crime, Enforcer Vi. Jinx's reputation grew, leaving the people of Zaun divided as to whether she was a hero for sticking it to the arrogant Pilties or a dangerous lunatic for escalating existing tensions between their two cities. After months of ever-increasing carnage, Jinx unveiled her biggest plan yet. In her trademark electric pink, Jinx daubed the walls of the Ecliptic Vaults, one of Piltover's most secure treasuries, with a very unflattering caricature of Enforcer Vi and the details of her own intention to rob the stores within. An uneasy sense of anticipation settled on Piltover and Zaun leading up to the promised gape of the heist. Many doubted even Jinx would have the guts to show up and risk almost certain capture. When the day arrived, Vi, Sheriff Caitlin, and the wardens prepared a trap for Jinx outside the treasury. But Jinx had already smuggled herself inside by way of an oversized coin crate that had been delivered days before. When Vi heard pandemonium erupt from inside the structure, she knew the wardens had been outclassed once again. She burst into the treasury, and the ensuing confrontation left the Ecliptic Vaults a smoldering ruin, and the merry mischief maker Jinx nowhere to be found. Jinx remains at large to this day, and is a constant thorn in Piltover's side. Her schemes have inspired copycat crimes among the chempunks, as well as numerous satirical plays lampooning the incompetence of the wardens, and even a smattering of new colloquialisms throughout both cities, though no one has yet had the courage to call Enforcer Vi pretty in pink to her face. Jinx's ultimate endgame and her obvious obsession with Vi both remain a mystery, but one thing is certain: her crimes are continuing and growing in sheer audacity. Renata Glasc, the Chem Baroness. Life had not always been good to Renata Glasc. Her parents were brilliant alchemists, focused on innovations for the healing arts. Dedicated to their work and their community in Zaun, they gave their care and their cures to anyone in need, regardless of whether their patients could afford them. Renata grew up accustomed to going to bed hungry, resentful of her parents' ideology, yet powerless to change her circumstances. The simple assisted, and the process remains enforced in self, inquire. That to me encosted by the content. In her first sales pitch, Renata convinced her parents that they wouldn't need to ask anything more than people could give if they started treating wealthier Zaunites. With loyal patients extolling the Glasc's talents to their betters, their charity work was soon paid for by the rates Renata set for the rich. Instead of living comfortably, however, the Glasc spent that money developing a highly refined Cumtech formula to extend the lives of their sickest patients. No matter what they did, the formula always had unwanted side effects, such as making their patients extremely suggestible or extremely violent, so they continued to try and improve their work. Only Renata, bitter at what her parents chose to do with the money she had earned them, wondered if the formula could be useful as is. Up in Piltover, the elite clan leaders who had been making money off of Zaunite medical stopgaps heard whispers of the Glasc family's research. Not willing to let anything threaten their bottom line, they paid off a handful of enforcers to take care of it. Renata woke to the sound of her parents' screams as her home burned down around them. She lost her arm trying and failing to save them. With only her family name and the scraps of research that survived the fire, Renata swore to avoid her parents' mistake of thankless altruism. Instead, she threw herself into building her meager inheritance into something bigger, something that could give her everything she'd never had, something that would give her money and power and control, an empire. As the years passed, she became the brains behind several successful small-time operations while building relationships with unsavory but influential individuals throughout the city. She'd give people jobs, lend them money, and give them medicine for their sick children. You would be a big man for the worlds to give you for the disciplines of life. She offered a space to work and stability for their families in exchange for their work in perpetuity. The poorest among them couldn't afford to say no. Renata found herself with plentiful access to new and unique product designs and novel uses for the chemtech formula that was her parents' legacy. Profits soared. She then established Glasc Industries after purchasing the first of what would eventually be dozens of factories to manufacture her high-end chemtech products. Glasc Industries quickly expanded across Zaun, from chemtech mining operations to dance halls to refineries, angering some barons who'd held monopolies over the ventures. But, one by one, Renata persuaded them all to go into business with her. And just like that, Renata quietly managed to become a chem baron in her own right, and no one could push back for fear of upsetting their own cash flow. While Glasc Industries flourished, Renata herself remained in the shadows, waiting for the right time to make her next move. That time came after a chemical accident sent poisonous fumes sweeping through the streets of Zaun, leaving the city in its worst state in decades. Amidst the noxious gray clouds, Glasc Industries offered basic breathers and replacement filters to everyone in the city, for free. Now everyone in Zaun knew of Renata Glasc and her benevolence. She had earned Zaun's loyalty. Word of her generosity swept through Piltover as well. For the first time, shopkeepers looked seriously at Renata's elegant and ultra-refined chemtech designs and soon lined their shelves with her products. Now, every fashionable Piltovan owns at least one Glasc Industries product, and the wealthiest among them vie to sit beside Renata at novelty galas and the opera house. But Renata's plan was never to be a chem baron in Zaun or the corporate darling of Piltover. No, she aims to take Piltover's source of financial power for herself, the Sun Gate she had dreamed of so often in her youth. For she who controls the Sun Gate controls the flow of trade, and she who controls the trade controls the world. With the secret cache of her parents' chemtech formula embedded in every Glasc product in both Piltover and Zaun, ready to be released at her command, side effects and all, it's only a matter of time before everyone works for Renata Glasc. Ziggs, mad chemist. The twisted, unfathomable madman known across Runeterra as Ziggs began his life as an ordinary man in Piltover. As a child, he displayed a prodigious intellect and a boundless sense of curiosity. The principles and interactions of the natural world fascinated him, eventually leading him to pursue a scholarship at the prestigious University of Piltover. It did not take long for his brilliance to be recognized. Ziggs' research into the natural sciences was impressive, groundbreaking even. But he found that Piltover's attention had been stolen away ever since the discovery of Hextech and the opportunities the hybrid of magic and technology presented. Ziggs found himself on the outside looking in, seeing magic as a crutch leaned upon by those who were either incapable of understanding how the world worked or simply didn't care enough to find out. He became a vocal critic of what he saw as a new and ignorant fad within the university. Ziggs instead delved into the chemical potential of alchemy, and despite the boon his intellect garnered for the field, his efforts earned him little more than the ridicule of his fellow academics. Before long, his funding had dried up, and he was forced out of the university and out of Piltover. Ziggs had no choice but to begin a new life in Zaun. In the Undercity, life was cheap and the demand for innovation high. Ziggs was quickly able to find work in the emergent chemtech industries, lending his skills and relentless drive for a variety increasingly unscrupulous clients. His experiments, often of questionable ethicality, cast a wide net, augmenting humans, animals, and even fusions of the two among countless other endeavors. Nonetheless, he pushed his new field forward at an incredibly rapid pace, but often at the expense of his own health. Understanding better than anyone the chemical needs of a living body, he engineered stimulants that could keep him alert and working for weeks at a time, before he would collapse, shivering and feeble, and sleep for days on end. Ziggs' obsessive, tireless efforts as an alchemist meant he found no shortage of patrons and clients, eventually including even the war masons of Noxus. The gossip was rampant across both Piltover and Zaun that the Empire and their Grand General were on the verge of bankruptcy from paying Piltover's extortionate tithes for military passage to the campaigns in northern Shurima, and soon they might be looking elsewhere for new, less expensive conquests. So long as they paid his fees, Ziggs didn't care. After years of smaller, off-and-on projects, Ziggs was approached by a Noxian military commander named Emistan, who contracted the alchemist to help her break the bitter stalemate of the war in Ionia. She needed a new kind of weapon from him, the like of which no one had ever seen before, and she could make him a wealthy man indeed. Putting aside all other concerns, Ziggs poured all of his intellect, knowledge, and experience into the synthesis of this new weapon. The result of his efforts was an alchemical fire that was unstable, volatile, and utterly horrifying. When it was finally unleashed in Ionia against the enemies of Noxus, it burned hot enough to fracture stone and tainted the earth around it with dense, metallic poisons so completely that almost nothing would grow there. Even Amistan's own allies were appalled, though not quite enough to name her and Ziggs as war criminals. Now, without any restraint for capital, materials, or even subjects to experiment upon, Ziggs nonetheless feels the weight of years upon him. His most recent work has taken a decidedly more biological angle, and of a far more dramatic scope. A recent exercise in the melding of animal, man, and machine left his laboratories in ruins, his face held together with filthy bandages, and his subject freely prowling the streets of Zaun. Yet Ziggs remains undeterred. He has already mastered the destruction of flesh, and thus now has turned to the preservation and transformation of it, and perhaps even the possibility that life need not end with an inescapable death. Twitch, the plague rat. A plague rat by birth, a connoisseur of filth by passion. Twitch is a paranoid and mutated rat that walks upright and roots through the dreads of Zaun for treasures only he truly values. Armed with a chem-powered crossbow, Twitch is not afraid to get his paws dirty as he builds a throne of refuse in his kingdom of filth, endlessly plotting the downfall of humanity. The Dreadnought! Urgot always believed he was worthy. As a headsman, an executioner of the weak, he was a living embodiment of the Noxian ideal that strength should rule, making it a reality with every swing of his axe. His pride swelled as the bodies piled ever higher behind him, and his intimidating presence kept countless warbands in line. Even so, a single word was all it took to seal his fate. Sent to distant Zaun to eliminate a supposed conspiracy against the ruler of Noxus, Urgot realized too late the mission was a setup, removing him from the capital even as the usurper Swain seized control of it. Surrounded by agents of the Chem Barons, and enraged that everything he believed was a lie, Urgot was dragged down into the Chemtech mines beneath Zaun. He was defeated, he was enslaved, he was not worthy after all. He endured the mine's hellish conditions in grim silence, waiting for death. In the dredge, death came in many forms. The mine's warden, Baron Voss, would sometimes offer freedom in return for a prisoner's tortured confession, granting it with the edge of her blade. From the screams that echoed through the tunnels, Urgot learned about the wonders of Zaun. There was something special about the city, something marvelous, and evident even in the secrets that spilled from slit throats. Urgot didn't know what it was until he was finally brought before Voss, fearing that she would break him. But as the Baron's blade cut into his flesh, Urgot realized that his body was already racked with agony, far beyond anything Voss could inflict. The dredge had made him stronger than he'd ever been as a headsman. Pain was Zaun's secret. His laughter drove Voss back to the surface, and a reign of anarchy began in the depths. Seizing control of the prison, Urgot reveled in new trials of survival. He found the parts of his body that were weakest and replaced them with scavenged machinery, technology created by those who would die without it, necessity being the mother of pain. The guards could no longer enter the areas Urgot had carved out of Voss's grasp. The prisoners themselves were more afraid of their new master than they were of her. Many even grew to hold a fanatical respect for Urgot, as they were forced to hear his feverish sermons on the nature of power, his grip tightening around the necks of those who would not listen. Only when a Noxian agent arrived in the dredge was Urgot finally forced to confront his own past. Though the spy recognized him and sought his aid in escaping, Urgot beat him mercilessly and hurled his broken body into the darkness. It was not strength that ruled Noxus, Urgot now realized, but men. And men were weak. There should be no rulers, no lies, nothing to interfere with the pure chaos of survival. Starting a riot that ignited a chemtech vein within the mine, Urgot shook the city above and cracked the prison open in an explosion that rivaled the birth of Zaun itself. Many prisoners died, with thousands fleeing into the sump, but the worthy, as ever, survived. From that day, Urgot's reign of terror only grew. A hideous fusion of industrial machinery and Noxian brutality, he slaughtered chem barons and their lackeys one by one, gathering a following among Zaun's downtrodden masses. He was said to be a new savior, one who would lift the boot of the oppressor from the neck of every common Zaunite. However, his actions did not make such distinctions, as Urgot tested the worthiness of the meek and the powerful alike. To any who found themselves spared in his deadly trials, his message was clear. He was not there to lead, but to survive. If others were worthy, they would survive too. When Urgot finally struck at representatives of the Piltovan merchant clans, the wardens were forced to intervene, hauling him in chains to a fortified prison cell, though this merely seemed to confirm the Dreadnought as a legend among the gangers, the Sump Snipes, and the Forgotten. For Piltover is not the first to shackle Urgot, and one must wonder if any cage can ever hope to hold him for long. Viktor, Herald of the Arcane. To understand the full impact of Hextech and the legacy it has left behind in our world, one must first understand the minds behind it. While much is known and written about Jace Talus, the vaunted man of progress, it is considerably harder to verify anything about his counterpart, Viktor. Your humble author has made several requests to the Piltover Council and various faculties within the Academy, but they claim that any records relating to his employment there were lost during the tumultuous events that ultimately led to his death. I will leave it to your judgment as to whether this seems plausible, and simply recount what I have been able to glean from public sources such as the unexpectedly superb back catalogs of the Piltover Gazette, and what little remains of the Hexgate construction documentation I was able to source by, let us say, less official means. Born to a poor family in the fissures beneath Zaun, it appears Viktor always knew hardship. The polluted Undercity afflicted him with both a limp and a rare, life-limiting illness, which alienated him from the other children. Yet despite all the impediments to his body, Viktor's mind was allowed to grow without restraint and flourished. He once spoke with a colleague of mine about a formative moment in his youth. Playing in the effluent streams of the Sump with his toy boat, he made reference to encountering a disgraced doctor who had gone to disturbing and extreme lengths in pursuit of science. Progress needed boundaries, and this early lesson served Viktor well when he caught the eye of the celebrated Professor Cecil B. Heimerdinger years later. He was taken up to Piltover Academy for a full education and to serve as the professor's assistant. This is precisely why I find it difficult to believe that no records have survived in their administrative archives, not to mention Heimerdinger himself, who some on the council claim not even to remember. Such petty revisionism. But finally, Viktor had a home where his genius could truly be cultivated. When a laboratory accident, see Chapter 6, Enforcement in the Undercity, revealed unauthorized experiments on Academy property, Heimerdinger sent Viktor to remove anything hazardous. But instead of danger, Viktor found intrigue, pages of handwritten notes, speaking of a feverish ambition to master magic through science. It was here that he struck a friendship with the wayward inventor Jace Talus, and their shared vision would change the world forever. The fruit of their labors was, of course, Hextech, a technology so revolutionary that it propelled Piltover into a wondrous new era. Viktor and Jace were not just peers in innovation, but brothers in all but blood. However, Viktor's illness worsened. He drove them toward a possible solution, an adaptive runic matrix outlined and illustrated in full in Chapter 13, the Hex Core. With its power to seemingly evolve its own configuration, he hoped it could augment organic matter and heal him, but was met only with failure. Self-experimentation is always risky, and Viktor knew it would likely cost him his standing in the academic community, as well as his loved ones. Even so, by all accounts, he truly believed Jace would be an exception to this. But when his friend's prejudices against the Undercity and its people came to light, it seems Viktor felt their bond beginning to weaken. Resolving to hide his plans, he experimented alone, until he ultimately lost control of the Hex Core. According to 2 verified sources within the Academy, see Appendix H for full transcripts, it seems that some loss of life occurred as a result, though details are notably vague. Nonetheless, it is apparent that Viktor's mental health was impacted, though he felt unable to destroy the Hex Core on his own. Despite their best efforts, both he and Jace had each failed to save lives with their inventions, and Viktor was determined to make amends. Any plans he may have formulated in that regard were halted by the terrorist attack on the Piltover Council. He was critically injured in the blast, and saved only by the quick thinking and rapid intervention of his old friend, Jace Talus. The Hex Core was able to regenerate his wounds to a degree that has astounded and baffled some of the greatest minds in all the world, indeed, such that it sounds almost akin to a vulgar fantasy or fiction of science. We will cover this more exhaustively in Chapter 21, the theory of biomechanics, but suffice to say, the Viktor that stepped forth was to a man as Hextech is to the simple wheel, and he had little gratitude for what Jace had done for him. Walking alone among the broken and forgotten denizens of the Undercity gifted Viktor a new purpose, for his cold touch could apparently heal suffering and remove emotion. Word spread quickly throughout Zaun of a healer, and soon enough the healer became a savior. The commune that sprung forth around him attracted some of the most hopeless and pitiful cases, until it was attacked by the Noxian garrison, see Chapter 19, Martial law in Piltover under General Ambessa Medarda, and Viktor was once again physically incapacitated. This time, however, something changed. Devoid of fear, love, bitterness, joy, hatred, or compassion, he rose up as the mechanical herald of a second new era, with his followers reduced to little more than puppets of his will. Doubtless, for all his vast and unsympathetic intelligence, Viktor's purpose was clearer than it had ever been. He would save humanity from themselves by enacting a glorious evolution across the entire world, whether they understood its need or not. Not know. Extract from The Price of Progress, a treatise by Professor Cristobal Limir. Wart, the uncaged wrath of Zaun. Warwick is a monster who hunts the gray alleys of Zaun. Transformed by agonizing experiments, his body is fused with an intricate system of chambers and pumps, machinery filling his veins with alchemical rage. Bursting out of the shadows, he preys upon those criminals who terrorize the city's depths. Warwick is drawn to blood and driven mad by its scent. None who spill it can escape him. Though many think of Warwick as no more than a beast, buried beneath the fury lies the mind of a man, a gangster who put down his blade and took up a new name to live a better life. But no matter how hard he tried to move on, he could never escape the sins of his past. Memories of that time come to Warwick in flashes, before they're inevitably lost, replaced by searing echoes of the days he spent strapped to a table in Singh's lab, the mad chemist's face looming above him. He's whirled a haze of pain. Warwick could not recall how he fell into Singh's grasp, and even struggled to remember a time before the suffering began. The scientist patiently carved into him, installing pumps and hoses to inject chemicals into his veins, seeking what an alchemist always seeks: transmutation. Singed would reveal his subject's true nature, the deadly beast hidden within a good man. The chemicals pumped into Warwick's veins boosted his healing, allowing Singed to gradually and painfully reshape the man. When his hand was severed in the course of the experiment, Singed was able to reattach it, augmenting it with powerful pneumatic claws and bringing Warwick ever closer to his true potential. A chemical chamber was installed on Warwick's back and integrated with his nervous system. Whenever he felt rage or hate or fear, it would drive liquid fury deeper into his veins, fully awakening the beast within. He was forced to endure it all, every cut of the mad chemist's scalpel. Pain, Singh assured his subject, was necessary. It would prove to be the great catalyst of his transformation. Though the chemicals enabled Warwick's body to heal through most of the physical damage, his mind was shattered by the unending agony. Warwick struggled to recall a single memory from his past. All he could see was blood. But then he heard a little girl screaming something he couldn't understand. It sounded like a name. He'd already forgotten his. He sensed that was for the best. Pain soon overwhelmed all other thoughts. Blood was the only thing left. Though his body and mind were broken after weeks on the slab, Warwick stubbornly resisted the chemicals transmuting him. Toxins leaked from his eyes in place of tears. What? He coughed up gobs of caustic phlegm that sizzled against his chest before burning shallow holes in the floor of the lab. Restrained against the cold steel of the table, Warwick writhed in agony for hours on end, until his body finally gave out. With the untimely death of his subject, Singh disposed of the corpse in a charnel pit deep in Zaun's sump, before turning his mind to the next experiment. But death proved to be the true catalyst needed for Warwick's transformation. As he lay cooling atop the pile of corpses, the chemicals could finally complete their work. The chamber on his back began to pump. His body contorted unnaturally, bones bending and snapping, teeth growing, sinews tearing and then healing with a faint alchemical glow. Dead flesh replaced by something new and powerful. By the time his heart started beating once again, the man Warwick had been and the lives he'd lived were gone. He awoke to hunger. Everything hurt. Only one thing mattered. He needed blood. First, it was the blood of a nearby sump scrapper rooting through the charnel pile. And then, a priestess of the glorious evolved, seeking a member of her flock. Then a Piltovan apprentice taking a shortcut, and a filter-faced merchant avoiding a gang, and a dram dealer, and a tallyman, and a chempunk. He set up a den not far from a place that itched at the back of his now animal mind. There, he continued the slaughter, not caring who fell to his claws. So long as blood dripped from gnashing teeth, he would feel nothing but a smear of red on his conscience, the hunger in his gut overwhelming any concern for his random victims. Yet, even as he surrendered to the beast, glimpses of his past began to haunt him. He saw a bearded man reflected in the eyes of a beggar as he tore out his throat. The other man looked somber, somehow familiar. There were scars on his arms. Sometimes, as he fed in dark alleys on stray gangers, the flash of knives would remind him of an old blade covered in blood, blood passing from the blade to his hands, from his hands to everything he touched. Sometimes, he remembered the girl again. And still there was blood. It had always been there, he realized, his entire life, and nothing he did could wash it off. He'd left so many scars that even if he didn't remember his past, the city would. When he peered into the eyes of Zaun's criminals, the gang bosses, murderers, and thieves, he saw himself. The chamber on his back would fill his body with hate. His claws tore out of his fingers. He hunted. No longer content to kill indiscriminately, Warwick now pursues those already covered in the stench of blood, just as he was the day he was dragged to Singh's door. He still wonders if he truly wanted this. He can't remember details, but he remembers enough. Enough to know Singh had been right all along. The good man had been a lie, before disaster had burned it away, revealing the truth. He is Warwick. He is a killer, and there are so many killers to hunt. Zac. Secret weapon. Zack is the product of a toxic spill that ran through a chemtech seam and pooled in an isolated cavern deep in Zaun's sump. Despite such humble origins, Zack has grown from primordial ooze into a thinking being who dwells in the city's pipes, occasionally emerging to help those who cannot help themselves or to rebuild the broken infrastructure of Zaun. A group of Zaunite children first encountered Zack when they were out skimming rocks over a sump pool and some of the stones were thrown back. The returning pool became well known to Zaun's sump dwellers and eventually drew the attention of a shadowy cabal of chemtech alchemists. Over the protests of the local residents, the alchemists pumped the contents of the pool into vats and carried the substance back to their laboratories for experimentation. Via a series of experiments designed to test negative and positive reinforcement techniques, the alchemists discovered the coagulate mass within the pool appeared to have psychotropic tendencies. Simply put, it mirrored whatever stimulus was provided to it. If treated well, it responded with childlike glee and playfulness. But when its response to pain and aggression were tested, the alchemists lost numerous augmented sump scrubbers in the ensuing destruction. Most of the alchemists attributed this to nothing more than a simple reflex response, but two among their number weren't so sure. They questioned the morality of experiments that seemed entirely driven to produce a creature of unmatched aggression. When the pair dug further, they discovered the project was being funded by Saito Takeda, a Kim Baron with a notoriously violent temperament and reputation for bloody gang warfare. The implication was clear. Takeda sought to develop a fighter who could shrug off mortal wounds, squeeze into places humans could not, and who would obey any command. They also discovered the project's true name, the Zaun amorphous combatant. As they pondered the best course of action, the two dissenting alchemists saw more than just a mirroring of whatever stimulus was applied to the viscous gel. They saw behaviors manifest without any obvious stimulus, behaviors consistent with sentience. They came to know the creature as Zack and concluded that he exhibited the behaviors of a thinking, feeling being. They brought their findings to the spindle-limbed leader of their research team, but their concerns were ignored. Unwilling to let the matter drop, they began their own covert efforts to counter the violent teachings of the rest of their team. They sought to show Zack right from wrong, exposing him to acts of altruism and generosity. Their efforts bore fruit, with Zack showing sadness when one of the researchers hurt her hand, and reacting badly when another killed a rat in the laboratory. Eventually, they could no longer tolerate the cruel experiments being done to Zack by their fellow alchemists. One night, during Zaun's Progress Day remembrances, when the laboratory was empty, they drained Zack into a wheeled septic tank and dragged him to a far distant part of Zaun. When their act was later discovered, the foot soldiers of Baron Takeda sought them out. But Zaun is a big place, and the researchers were able to hide from their pursuers. They had thought to give Zack his freedom, but Zack did not want to be released, for he now considered the two researchers his family. They alone had shown him kindness, and he wanted to learn more from them. In truth, they were pleased by his reaction, for they had become so fond of Zack that they considered him their adoptive son. To stay hidden from Takeda's men, they changed their identities and appearance, taking up residence in a remote part of the sump, far from prying eyes. Zack learned to mimic their voices, and quickly adapted to shift his gelatinous mass into the required shapes to form sound. He lived alongside his adoptive parents for many years, hiding when necessary in sump pools or in the cracks in the cliffside rocks. His parents told Zack of the world in which he lived, how it could be beautiful and full of wonder. They showed him the moon rise over the sun gates, the play of rainbow light on the stained glass roofs of Zaun's commercial halls, and the bustling, vibrant beauty of their city's heart. They also explained how the world could be cruel and harsh, and Zack learned that people were sometimes mean and unkind, hateful and prejudiced. Zack rejected such behaviors and helped his parents where he could, as they used their skills to aid the people around them without attracting undue attention. They did what they could to treat the sick, mend broken machinery, or otherwise put their chem knowledge to benign use. These were golden years for Zaun, and he roamed Zaun through its almost limitless network of pipes and through the many cracks in its bedrock. As much as Zaun was a sentient being, too much stimulus from his environment could sometimes overwhelm his senses, and cause him to temporarily absorb the dominant emotions around him, for good or ill. Oftentimes, he couldn't help getting involved in aiding the oppressed and downtrodden against thuggish bullies, leading to rumors of his presence spreading through Zaun. Though the majority of tales were of him helping, others attributed destructive events to Zaun, a factory destroyed or a crevasse ripping open in a sump neighborhood. Eventually, those rumors reached the ears of Saito Takeda, and he sent a band of augmented thugs to retrieve what he saw as his property. His alchemists had been attempting, without success, to replicate the process that had created Zack from droplets left behind in his vat. Takeda wanted the creature returned, and his augmented heavies surrounded Zack's parents' home and attacked. They fought back, for they were chemtech researchers and not without esoteric means of defending themselves. But their defiance could not last forever, and eventually they were killed, despite Takeda's order that they be taken alive. Zack had been exploring subterranean seams far below Zaun, but sensed his parents' distress and raced back through the pipes of the city to the rescue. He arrived too late to save them, and the fury that overwhelmed him upon seeing their bodies was unmatched by anything the Baron's men had ever seen. Zack attacked in a ferocious display of stretching, smashing, and crushing. In his grief and anger, he demolished dozens of nearby dwellings, and by the time the battle was over, all the augmented thugs were dead. When the heightened emotions of battle drained from Zack's consciousness, he was overcome with remorse for the homes he had destroyed, and vowed to continue the good work done by his parents. He helped rebuild what he had destroyed, but as soon as the work was done, he vanished into Zaun's vast network of pipes. Now Zaun lives alone, dwelling in the tunnels and caverns threading Zaun, and bathing in the emotions of the city's inhabitants. Sometimes this enriches him, but other times it saddens him as he takes on both the good and bad of the city. He has become something of an urban legend among the people of Zaun, a mysterious creature that sometimes emerges from cracks in the rock or a section of damaged pipework. Most times this is to help those in need, but in times of trouble, when the city's moods turn grim, his appearance can be cause for trepidation. Zeri, the spark of Zaun. Raised in a large working-class family, Zeri grew up surrounded by warmth, care, and many strong opinions. They were no strangers to hardship, having lost loved ones to Zaun's dangers. Even so, their community was their strength. From birth, Zeri had a unique relationship with electricity. Each giggle caught a spark, each cry a shock. Magic wasn't rare in Zaun, but Zeri's electric charm was. It charged with her emotions, sometimes grounded, sometimes building to fierce and fiery. By her teenage years, her neighbors knew she was more likely the cause of power outages than a broken circuit. Life in Zaun was beautiful chaos, her grandma would say, and Zeri embodied that all too well. Not everyone found her quirks endearing. To family and friends, Zeri was a lovable mess. To others, she was simply a mess. During occasional outbursts where her stray currents shattered a street lamp or 2 or 12, Zeri thought she'd even see flashes of something or someone, but there was no time to dwell. She wished she had better control of her volatile powers. Her determination was there, but her patience could have used some work. Still, with every spark came an opportunity. One night, while Zeri strolled through the entresol markets, the ground rattled from underground excavations that soon swelled into a destructive quake. She wasted no time zooming past fallen buildings to rescue trapped victims. As her world slowly crumbled, Zeri became a furious blur. She knew the Chem Barons had mining facilities nearby that were installed after they claimed to have discovered resources better than Hextech, but what they did not reveal were the risks of their uncontrolled digging. The faster Zeri moved, the more charged she became. She thrived under pressure, realizing what her powers could do and how much her neighborhood meant to her, even if it meant nothing to the Barons. After the dust settled, survivors gathered to thank Zeri. Beneath her relief was anger. Zeri knew she could have saved more if she had better command of herself. What Zeri did accomplish was sure to catch the attention of the Barons. She knew they wouldn't think twice about who they went through to get to her, and she couldn't risk others getting hurt. Not again. To guard them from herself, Zeri scoured the mining disaster's wreckage and constructed a jacket to contain her electricity and avert the Baron's gaze. Now she could restrain her gift to protect those in need. Walking the damaged streets, Zeri saw broken faces. Families scrambled to rebuild, and Zeri lent her hand, doing all she could without her powers. But the more she helped, the more she witnessed. Workers struggled to jumpstart generators. Parents toiled to make meals with broken stovetops. These people didn't have anyone standing up for them, let alone someone with a gift like hers. She knew her district, and those like it would never truly be safe if things stayed the way they were. The Baron saw them as nothing more than objects to be neglected and resources to be bled. Zeri knew what had to be done. She couldn't wait for the next mining accident. She had to take the fight to the Barons. Zeri was a one-woman force, sending shockwaves through Zaun. Word spread of Chem Baron supply lines being destroyed, with reports of lightning striking faster than the eye could see. Enraged at their losses, the local Barons formed a rare alliance, and their combined power trounced Zeri wherever she went. She tried to adapt, to strike faster, but against the Baron's endless resources, it wasn't enough. She retreated with her body broken and her powers fizzling. The Barons were united. She was alone. As she headed home, Zeri expected disappointment from those she let down. But what welcomed her was family, friends, and people she'd never met, all standing up to fight their oppressors. From their rebuilt homes came rediscovered courage. Zeri had never felt so inspired, yet it was she who had inspired them. She was the spark that ignited their fire. And she was no longer alone. With the help of their neighbors, Zeri's mother had fashioned her a rifle, made of materials given by those Zeri fought for, the people of the Anthracol. The gun's ammo was Zeri's emotions, its conductive barrel amplifying her powers directly from her hands. Paired with her jacket, she could better control her voltage, charging up to shoot precise, or, at least, somewhat precise, electric bursts. Zeri gazed warmly at her family and her neighbors. She thought she'd lose them all in her efforts to fight back, but because she stood up for them, they stood up with her. Backed by her community, Zeri fights for those who cannot. Zaun is not perfect, and neither is Zeri, but sometimes a spark is all it takes to change the world. Ziggs! The Hexplosives expert. Ziggs was born with a talent for tinkering, but his chaotic, hyperactive nature was unusual among Yordle scientists. Aspiring to be a revered inventor like Heimerdinger, he rattled through ambitious projects with manic zeal, emboldened by both his explosive failures and his unprecedented discoveries. Word of Ziggs's volatile experimentation reached the famed Yordle Academy in Piltover, and its esteemed professors invited him to demonstrate his craft. His characteristic disregard for safety brought the presentation to an early conclusion, however, when the Hextech engine Ziggs was demonstrating overheated and exploded, blowing a huge hole in the wall of the academy. The professors dusted themselves off and sternly motioned for him to leave. Devastated, Ziggs prepared to return to Bandle City in shame. However, before he could leave, a group of Zaunite agents infiltrated the academy and kidnapped the professors. The Piltover military tracked the captives to a Zaunite prison, but their weapons were incapable of destroying the fortified walls. Determined to outdo them, Ziggs began experimenting on a new kind of armament, and quickly realized that he could harness his accidental gift for demolition to save the captured Yordles. Before long, Ziggs had created a line of powerful bombs he lovingly dubbed Hexplosives. With his new creations ready for their first trial, Ziggs traveled to Zaun and sneaked into the prison compound. He launched a gigantic bomb at the prison and watched with glee as the explosion tore through the reinforced wall. Once the smoke had cleared, Ziggs scuttled into the facility, sending guards running with a hail of bombs. He rushed to the cell, blew the door off its hinges, and led the captive Yordles to freedom. Upon returning to the academy, the humbled professors recognized Ziggs with an honorary title, Dean of Demolitions. Vindicated at last, Ziggs accepted the proposal, eager to bring his ever-expanding range of hexplosives to Greater Valoran